Welcome to the Jeff Knows Inc. Entrepreneurial Podcast with your host, Jeff Lopes. Jeff has over 2 decades experience as a serial entrepreneur, building brands like Kimura from his home basement to a multi-million-dollar global brand that has sold over 250,000 pairs of boxing gloves. Jeff's here to educate, guide, and drive you on the process of bringing your ideas and dreams to reality with the inspiring stories from some of the top business minds.
Welcome to episode number 92 of the Jeff Knows Inc. podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Lopes. Super excited to have on today Brent Gleeson, father, husband, former Navy SEAL, founder of Taking Point Leadership, author to a couple incredible books. One just recently released, Embrace the Suck. This was an epic conversation. Sit back, everyone, and enjoy. We are live on the Jeff Knows Inc. podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Lopes. Super excited to have across from me here, Brent Gleeson. How are you, brother?
I'm good, brother. How are you doing today?
I'm doing amazing. I have been following Brent on his journey in the last few years, and I've on and off saw him through social media, and we're connected through a mutual friend. And incredible story, incredible journey. How I always start my podcast is I try to allow the audience to know what you're currently doing, and then we just let the conversation flow and start talking. So what are you up to now?
Sure. Most recent news is that we thought 2020 wasn't exciting enough, so we decided to have another human. So we had a COVID baby. We squeezed him in right at the end of 2020, so he was born at 10:38 p.m. on New Year's Eve.
That's crazy. I saw that. Incredible.
And so ended 2020 on a high note. Like currently the founder, CEO of Taking Point Leadership. We're a leadership and organizational development consulting firm. So we work with predominantly Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, some medium-sized brands and organizations on everything from developing leadership at every level to culture transformation to employee engagement strategies, essentially, engaging in better people practices to create better business outcomes. Have 4 kids, married. We live in Rancho Santa Fe, and just pretty much like everyone else, just finding new ways to pivot on the battlefield of business and life.
How old are your children? Let's get into that. There's an age gap.
A 14-year-old son who's a freshman in high school. They're doing a hybrid learning model right now. Yeah. A 6-year-old who's almost 7. She's in first grade. We've got a 4-year-old who's almost 5. Their birthdays are 5 days apart. And he's in preschool. And now we have a 6-week-old. So we got a whole.
It's a full house, huh?
We got a full fire team.
With your company, when did you first start off your company? Do you have partners in that company, or you're on your own with that?
On my own with this one. This is my 3rd company. So first 2 companies, raised capital, had passive investors. We'll get into that and why I put air quotes around that. And a business partner from graduate school. This business is solely my business.
Now, I always like diving into that. How was your experience with a partnership?
The partnership, well, first of all, I met, after I transitioned out of the Navy, I met and it's a very cliche story, I met my business partner in my MBA program. Yeah. But again, in large part, from a few things you learn in graduate school, a lot of what you get out of it is networking or possibly meeting, potential partners, strategic partners, investors, or just finding a path that you want to take from a business standpoint. I've somehow have developed this mild taste for calculated risk. So I decided to jump headfirst into the world of entrepreneurship, just like you, which I've heard has about the same or similar failure rate as SEAL training. So luckily, it hasn't been easy, as we'll get into, but luckily, I've found ways to navigate that rather successfully. The partnership itself was great for about 10 years, but sometimes business partnerships, as the 2 individuals, for example, start to grow in different ways or start to have a slightly different vision on where to take the organization, or more importantly, how to take it there. That can become a challenge. Dual leadership is a challenge in and of itself, especially if there's vastly different management styles or variance, like I said, in the vision of the execution. So we had raised money for both of those businesses, so we did have boards of directors and investors to report into. It was angel capital, so not as formal as venture capital or hedge fund type of money, but at the same time, passive investors can have a pretty strong and powerful voice when they want to. So
there's a whole bunch of areas I want to go dive into there, but one I want to talk about when you left the military, going into back and following your education. How was that transition, and what put you in your mind to actually transition back into school? Because you constantly, I've had a lot of gentlemen that have been in the military on our podcast, and it's that transition. If I'm going to be an entrepreneur, or I'm gonna travel into back to school, or go into the private sector. There's so many different transitions. What clicked in your head to continue your education?
As I was considering what that transition path would be, and had just done some networking and just conversations with other folks who'd transitioned out, and you hear about some of the challenges and struggles, but I've found and also seen in others that when they have a very specific executable plan for that transition and exact steps, and it's timed down and concise, and they know exactly what they're going to do, and there's a lot of pre-work done leading up to the actual time they leave the service, typically, not surprisingly, are more successful in that transition than when there's a little bit more of a loose path towards what they want to do. So I found that, or at least my decision was that graduate school would be a good transitional period to sort of, learn new things, meet new people, retrain my brain towards, thinking like a business person or potentially an entrepreneur, which initially, interestingly, was not my vision for what I was going to do.
What was your original vision?
I had been a financial analyst for a large global commercial real estate development firm prior to the Navy, only for a year, but still it was kind of my educational background and my brief professional background in the business world. So, and when I got out, the real estate market was still booming. This was, of course, right before 2008, 2009, didn't see that ambush coming. And so, and living in Southern California and San Diego, where especially the housing market was just on fire. And of course, it wasn't a bubble. It was never going to end. We're going to ride that whole train to Glory Town. And so the graduate program I entered was basically a combined MBA and Master of Science in Real Estate. So real estate development was initially going to be the path, and then learned enough about it in grad school that it terrified me. So a lot of risk, big reward, but also can be potential for big loss. So we went the technology route and created our first company was a home finding search engine, basically the early version of Trulia or Zillow.
And how long did you have that company for?
Had that company we had it for an extended period of time, even overlapping when we started the second business. So in 2008, 2009 happened. That was my first real experience, kind of like we've experienced over the past year now almost with COVID. First dramatic shift or necessary strategic pivot on the entrepreneurial battlefield. And the housing market imploding didn't crush the business right away. But typically, as you know, when there's external factors or economic factors that are impacting a business, what's the first budget that goes? Well, usually marketing and other types of business development initiatives that don't, usually it's marketing is the first to go. So we were a very simple revenue model where people would pay us, it was a reoccurring revenue model. They pay us monthly guarantees to advertise and generate home buyer leads for their properties, just like these guys do. And so that business quickly plateaued and then gradually started to shrink as people started canceling contracts and things like that. And just these housing communities, condo towers were getting ripped back by the banks, and a lot of things that were out of our customers' control anyway. So we had learned so much about digital media, marketing, analytics, lead generation online, media buying, that we thought, well, maybe there's an opportunity here to create initially just an alternative revenue stream for that business and provide those services to the clients we still had, the customers we still had. And that business just started taking off. It started, it was doubling or tripling in size revenue-wise every year. Headcount-wise, we were doubling in size every year. So the other business, we shifted basically all our resources and energy into that one and kind of let the other one fizzle out a little bit, and then eventually shut it down a few years later. But and then I sold that basically a digital media agency in late 2016 to start this company.
Did you have an exit strategy in mind prior to that?
No, the exit was a bit more organic, having to do with what we talked about before. Some new opportunities that I was really passionate about that didn't really correlate with that business, along the lines of speaking and leadership development, some things that I'd found. I didn't necessarily have a passion for the industries those first two businesses were in, but I found that I loved building organizations and people practices, building a great culture and developing leaders and seeing how those all of that collectively helps an organization navigate change, growth, sustainability, profitability, basically generating desired business outcomes through enhancing the performance of people. So drawing on a lot of the leadership and culture practices and principles that forge elite special operations units and seeing, well, how does some of this apply in the high performance team attributes of a business organization?
So let's rewind a bit. Going into the military, how old are you when you first registered for the military?
24, I believe. So it's kind of a funny story. I grew up in Dallas, Texas, did my undergraduate education at Southern Methodist University, so degrees in finance and economics. So that segued into my initial job as a financial analyst for a large global company called Trammell Crow Company, based out of Dallas, Texas. And at that time, I had a really close friend of mine in college at SMU who was a year behind me. And now he was one of those individuals you hear about who had a lifelong passion or vision or dream to graduate, join the Navy, and at least attempt to be accepted into the notorious Navy SEAL training pipeline. Something at the time I didn't really know much about. I had read a couple books about SEALs in Vietnam, and he and I actually started training together after I graduated. For me, it was just a way to have an accountability partner, stay fit, work out, and also simultaneously help him prepare for this journey that laid ahead. And so the dialogue we were consistently having about the SEAL community and naval special warfare piqued my interest, of course. So I started doing more research about the history of the NSW community, our forefathers in the underwater demolition teams, and how we essentially cut our teeth as an elite assault force in 1962 and beyond into the Vietnam War. And long story short, that growing fascination coupled with the somewhat boring nature of my entry-level financial analyst position led to the culmination of being like, you know what, this will all be here for me later on. And that was really one of the first times I'd ever really taken any significant calculated risk. So,
did you have anybody in your family in the military prior to you?
My dad had served in the Marine Reserves during Vietnam. Thankfully, did not have to deploy overseas, but wasn't something he really ever talked about, nor did he impress upon my twin brother or I that we should serve in the military.
So, okay, there's two things there. So your brother served as well with you?
No.
Okay.
No.
So
we're fraternal twins. We couldn't be more different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you took that moment, and I'm just thinking of myself in that situation, how my parents would react. You're obviously in school. You obviously had a bright future, probably if you succeeded that direction. How was that first conversation when you turned to your parents and said, I want to join the military?
They were shocked because this isn't something I had talked a lot about, or they hadn't been witnessing me reading all these books or any vision of a dream of joining the military in any capacity. So what I did was actually super old school. I wrote them a letter, a handwritten letter. I remember because I did it at my desk on the 42nd story of a high-rise tower in downtown Dallas when I should have been, working. And it was basically the letter said, hey guys, thanks for everything you've done for me thus far. I'm going to make a bit of a career transition, at least for now. And I'm joining my buddy Matt. I'm joining Matt on his journey to not just join the Navy, but to try out to become a SEAL. Obviously, anybody hearing that who at least has some understanding of the extremely high attrition rate of a program like that is going to tell you that it's too risky, especially if that's the only thing you want to do in the Navy, for example. I always joke that the SEAL program is a fantastic recruiting tool because 90% of those guys end up in the fleet and they put them wherever they want. And so obviously got a bit of a pushback, but my parents have always been extremely supportive when it comes to developmental opportunities, well-roundedness, and just general things like that when they can tell there's a passion behind it. And once they realized how serious I was, that this wasn't just we'll see how this is going to work out. People with that mindset typically don't make it that far in the program. And so they were supportive, I would say cautiously optimistic, but having that support was important. Now, granted, this was right before 9/11, so a little bit of a different implication. It was peacetime, so they're like, well, it's a dangerous job, it's risky, but at least we're not at war. And then 9/11 happened literally 3 days before my SEAL training class started advanced training. So the pipeline is roughly, can be 14, 15, 16 months long, depending on how they adjust things.
Yeah.
So you get BUDS, which is the first 6 months, typically what you see, on TV, movies, and documentaries, the basic underwater demolition, where you have Hell Week and all that other stuff. Then you go to SQT, or SEAL qualification training, which is the advanced portion of the pipeline. So that week we had between BUDS and SQT was 9/11. So that obviously was a huge dramatic shift in the mindset of military service at the time.
Yeah. So when you did graduate, how many deployments did you have?
3. And then, so I had not, we had, so Afghanistan had kicked off, and then I was assigned to SEAL Team 5. And so you go into a platoon cycle, which you do your workup, all your training, your individual professional development training. So you go into different schools, then you link back up with your platoon and do platoon training as part of your workup, and then you deploy. And then that's kind of your cycle as you go. So we were actually the first task unit deployed into task units. Typically, we call it a troop now, but typically about 40 SEAL operators with dozens of support staff. And so we were deployed into Iraq in early 2003 as essentially the first SEALs, or their SEALs. There were other tier 1 special operations units working there as well, but the first SEAL task unit to work in and around mostly Baghdad, Ramadi, and Fallujah at the time, doing what we call capture or kill, essentially hunting down the guys on the deck of cards or blacklist or what have you.
That's so when you came back, your first time back, and where was your mindset? Like, you always hear and you speak to gentlemen that are in the Navy or Navy SEALs, that brotherhood, that excitement is like you need that back again. Did you feel that at your second deployment, like that energy you needed? You had to consistently want that. Like when you left the third time, was that need still there?
Yeah, it's always there. It's interesting. It's interesting you mentioned that because, again, I'll caveat this. My contribution to the war on terror as a special operator pales in comparison to some of my, brothers and our sisters out there who are, career military people and their families who serve alongside them. And, I've got buddies who've done 14 or 15 combat deployments. Wow. So you can imagine what that, progression looks like as them as an individual, or even mental health, or how it impacts their family and marriage and parenting. That's not something I had really wanted. I was seeing guys on deployment. We'd get home from a rough op, and they're on the satellite phone with their pregnant wife who's about to give birth, and they're not going to be there. And, so just this dynamic of different types of emotion and balancing relationship and supporting your spouse and raising your kids over Skype. It's a, challenging thing, but kind of going back to your point, one thing that we've seen a lot of guys do who've had really, really horrific experiences, like Marcus Luttrell, for example, depicted in the book and the movie Lone Survivor. One of the things that was positively impactful for him wasn't to, after going through what he did, wasn't to transition out, it was to stay in. And kind of piggybacking off your point around the camaraderie and the need to have that support network that really gets it and understands it. I think he did 2 more combat deployments after the Operation Red Wing occurrence. So yeah, it's important. And it's also kind of going back to the conversation around transition for guys. It's tough because that type of community and culture is almost impossible to replicate in the civilian world.
Were you married? When did you get married? How long have you been married for?
About 10 years. So no, I was not married then. So it was,
So you met your wife after you came back out?
Yeah, ironically, I met her at a SEAL wedding in Costa Rica. So one of my best buddies from BUDS and SEAL Team 5 married her childhood friend from Newport Beach, California, and we met at their wedding. So
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult situation when you hear exactly what you're saying, where you're overseas and you're trying to still keep that relationship going and having children. And that's why I was asking you if I wasn't sure if you had passed that or not. So with the leadership program that you're currently running, taking point, when you started this company, where was your mindset? Like, did you imagine it growing into this, where we talked about before you went on air, you're working with sports teams, Toronto Raptors, which is our local team here. Did you have that mind already where it was going to go? Because that's pretty intense client base you're working with. Where was the first steps and where did you see it going?
The first step was to write my first book, which I wrote that as a strategic step towards creating the foundational principles of much of the leadership and culture elements and curriculum and learning modules that we train, for lack of a better phrase, and with our client partners. So I wanted to write a book that could be a great thought leadership piece, also help me collect my philosophies and do the appropriate amount of research, because it really was essentially like writing a doctoral thesis on change management or change leadership in a modern organization. So did a lot of research for that book, which really helped me formulate a lot of our philosophies on, what a modern 21st century organization looks like, how employee engagement strategies have shifted, the importance of culture and achieving desired business results, and how to create a more agile, nimble organization that's less command and control, essentially an organization that navigates change more successfully than a typical organization that's run kind of the more old school way. And so the book was step one, and then building a curriculum and team around many of the foundational principles in that book to create an organization that helps. We're not a turnaround, consulting firm. We're more of a good to great, to steal Jim Collins' phrase, organization going into companies. And I learned this in my second business is it's good to go into organizations that get it. They understand what you do. They have previously invested in it typically, or at least have wanted to invest in developing their people and their leaders and their managers and improve engagement and better align culture. And then step two was to continue. I had already started speaking at different things all over the world. It was actually my Forbes leadership column that I've had for now about 8 years. Was the catalyst to a lot of opportunity to speak on many of the principles, because the title of the column is from the battlefield to the boardroom, so it's fall under their leadership genre. And so that quick funny story, the way I started in the speaking world while I was running my second business, which that's why I didn't go all into speaking, because I had a moral, ethical, and fiduciary responsibility to run that business, not be off in Hong Kong speaking on a big stage. But it was the president of Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Asia Pacific, at that time, one of the top 5 executives in the global organization, who read my first article in Forbes, sent me an email, because you go to the author page, you can, find the author's email if they provide it. Sent me a personal email just saying how he loved the article, and a guy who just was really fascinated with the culture and mindset of special operations, awesome, high energy, fitness obsessed Australian guy who just rose in the ranks within the investment banking world very quickly. And the guy's a couple years older than me, and now the number 3 at Bank of America. It's like astonishing mindset of this, how not just intelligent he is, but how the drive that he has in every aspect of what he does. And he asked me to come do a series of keynote presentations and breakout workshops at their 3-day global leadership summit in Hong Kong. That was the following month. Didn't ask if I was a speaker, didn't ask to see any videos or for a website or references, nothing. Didn't even ask about details of the existing programs that we had, because I had none. So, you're an entrepreneur, so what do you think I said? I was like, you're damn right I
will. Those opportunities would come once in a lifetime. What's crazy is we're having this conversation. I was recording another podcast earlier today. We're just having this exact conversation where it's so important for people to understand. A lot of people get in that drifting mindset when they start, whether it's building themselves as a brand or doing social media or whatever it is. If they don't get that initial reaction or initial engagement, they always feel that mindset where it's that mental game they're playing with themselves, where they feel like they're failing or they're not achieving. It takes one opportunity. You constantly need to be constantly putting out content, like you did. 10 years of content, 10 years of valuable content on your time, and it's led to an incredible career. And it's being able to understand that it takes one person to read that content or one person to react to you. Right. It just alters the course of everything. So I appreciate that.
It 100%. And I mean, you're a branding marketing expert, and my second company was a marketing agency. So have really been able to embrace, the importance of investing the time and energy in really, really great content strategies. And that was just a great example. And that content strategy was the momentum for starting to build speaking opportunities. And I didn't do a lot because I was running the other business, but I had enough of a foundation of both content and previous speaking clients who were global brands, many of them, to have a persona of, being a globally recognized speaker. Not smoke and mirrors, but technically I was. And so after writing the book, I also used the book and also the previous speaking engagements and the content we already had to continue to ramp up speaking. So I sold the business 2016, 2017 was write the book and double your speaking engagements and speaking revenue to continue to develop that momentum. And then 2018 was build the business around it, build the team so that it's, I can't be all this guy. There's no exit strategy from Brent Gleeson. It's build a brand that is now taking point leadership and a team of experts far smarter than me. I just take credit for all their work.
I always say that the minute you could fire yourself from a position, you're doing well for yourself, right?
Right.
Now, I'm gonna dive back to one little thing. I want to ask you a quick question. I always ask everybody this: when you first stepped on stage and you flew out and Bank of America, you're doing your first speech. How was your first reaction? How was your first mindset speaking on stage? I always like hearing people's reaction.
Terrified.
It's crazy, huh?
I had done like some panels or a short 10 or 15 minute presentation on, let's say, like digital analytics or something that I didn't really care about, like at a digital marketing conference, more of a sales and business development thought leadership strategy. Just me clicking through a deck and talking about whatever. Not the same thing at all by any means. So my first real event was in front of a few hundred senior people from Bank of America Merrill Lynch in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
So I was, I just like I still do today, just like anybody who has the drive to continually improve, I have a very regimented preparation process. Even if it's a similar presentation I've done 3 times that week already, it's still very, very regimented. Yeah. And so I prepped for weeks for this thing, working with the content with my buddy now. We're actually the guy I'm talking about, we're now godparents to each other's children. We travel with our family. So you never know where these relationships will go. I will say, but when we talk about opportunities, one thing you learn quickly as an entrepreneur is not every shiny object is an opportunity you should pursue. This just happened to be one of those ones where I felt a passion for it. It didn't feel random. It didn't feel just purely opportunistic. It felt like a good strategic move to engage in this, while also being able to bring business to that existing digital media agency too, using my speaking and my brand to bring clients from a marketing perspective, which actually worked quite well. And now it's a similar, if not same, business development strategy. But 95% of our ongoing leadership development clients began with a speaking engagement or a sales kickoff meeting or a 2-hour workshop that we provide. So we did that, and I remember my wife back then, pre-kids, she would travel with me. Now, she never wanted to go to like Nebraska, but if I'm going to Hong Kong or London, she's like, I'm in. New York, 100%. And she's like, I like you a lot better after you're done speaking, because I'm so in my head, especially in those first few years where I didn't know what I was doing. I would prepare and I go very scripted, but if you're going to go very scripted, you have to rehearse like hell so you don't sound scripted, and so you can pivot off the script and come back and not skip a beat. That's just my style. Everybody has kind of something different, but yeah, so nervous. And
so that's your style. So you like scripting everything. You like having everything memorized in your mind?
For the most part, yeah, about 95% scripted. Because for me, I want to make sure that I'm getting the exact point across in the exact way I want to, providing the right amount of data or information or telling a joke at the perfect time. If I'm too unscripted, now I've gotten, obviously over the years with the experience, I can speak more off the cuff in any type of scenario, but that's kind of how I developed as a speaker, but then have been able to be much more unscripted as I go, because now all these things are floating around in my head and I can pull from this bucket or that bucket and assemble them quickly if I need to.
Yeah, I love that. Your children, I mean, that's something I'm very passionate about. We talked about before we went on air, entrepreneurial dads, your children. First off, let's talk about 2 things. One, as a busy entrepreneur, how do you find the harmonization with family and parenting and business? And how do you, I don't like calling it balance. I like calling it more harmonization. Like Is it just scheduling, blocking? Like what's a big part of your schedule?
It's a good question. I don't use the word balance either. I use work-life integration.
Yeah.
It's kind of the philosophy I have. I mean, now more than ever that many of us are working from home or in and around the home. There's no lines anymore. It's all blurred together. There's pros and cons to all of that, but challenging because when I got married and I was running my second business, it was a traditional, I'm going to the office at our San Diego headquarters. We had offices in New York and Vegas, and get there at 8 and be home by 5 or 6, normal schedule. Not much traveling at all, just for some sales or client trips here and there. Now, when I exited that and started head first all into speaking and traveling to develop the leadership side of the business and gain new big clients where I need to be face to face with them, I was traveling all the time, and a lot of the speaking and consulting realm is somewhat seasonal. So during the busy times of the month, so January, February into March, and then you're getting into Q3 and Q4, gone every week. And sometimes it's leave it on a Sunday, come back on a Friday. So very challenging. I'm blessed with a very, very supportive wife and a great mom and kids who are understanding. But at the same time, that can only sustain for so long.
Yeah.
For all of us, and for me too. So one of my strategic imperatives for 2020, for example, was to continue to enact some of the strategies that we needed to for building the team, shifting a bit away from so much speaking, being selective in the speaking that we knew was only going to drive revenue to the other side of the business, which was long-term consulting. And then, continuing to deploy the team out more to client sites and offsite events and meetings, as opposed to me always being there. And again, just an entrepreneurial initiative of, working not so much in the business, but on the business.
Yeah, 100%.
And hadn't totally figured out how I was going to do that. And then God blessed us with a global pandemic. And boom, travel went from every week to not at all. So I've traveled maybe 3 times in the past year. So.
Yeah. And do you appreciate it more now that you're spending all this time with your kids and you're seeing them grow? Is it a different mindset all of a sudden? And obviously now you have a newborn, so this is a different world altogether. Back to diaper changing.
Totally. It's been fantastic, and granted, obviously the business has initially struggled, from March and into the summer, where our largest revenue stream and business development initiative, went to zero initially. While everyone is trying to figure out, what is this, adoption of new technology and digital transformation and people getting used to working remote or doing things like this virtually. Nobody wanted to do it virtually because we're like, well, we'll wait till all this blows over and then we'll get back to doing things like we've always done them. So there's a lot of positive benefit to this that creates scalability and organizations finding massive cost savings and rethinking their workspace needs and the money they spend on that. I feel bad for the people in the commercial real estate realm. But again, a lot of this transition, because adversity breeds innovation and creativity, and reassessing, how we spend our time, but also what we invest resources in as a business too.
Let's talk about that quickly, because I do invest into commercial real estate quite a bit. I'd like to hear your mindset with that. When you said that, do you think, my mindset is over the next 5-10 years, jump on as much commercial real estate as possible, because a lot of businesses, when the reality of the world gets back to normal, people are still going to start businesses again. People, I think, are going to really take it to another level. A lot of people will actually try to become entrepreneurs at this point. And that mindset where a lot of people will still have that fear of buying. So now there'll be so much more opportunity to lease. Do you don't think so?
I don't really know. Like I said before, my pre-Navy time was commercial real estate, and my post-Navy, while I was in grad school, I was not only learning about it, but I was working for CBRE. It's kind of a glorified internship, but still. And but like a lot, we initially renegotiated our lease payments with our current office space right now, and didn't want to, but it was more of a necessity on finding ways we can kind of recapitalize the business and save money. And so that we applied for the PPP loan, and we didn't want to have to let anybody go. So there are other avenues. I think some businesses, larger organizations, as we've seen, are going to think more permanently about remote working. But that being said, I think probably the majority will find ways to get back to, get people back in the office. Because again, at the end of the day, the social interactivity, the collaboration, the ability to share information more easily, it's really, really, really a challenge.
I think the world is craving to get back to a work environment. I think a lot of people, even people that are working at home, I'm sure they enjoy the time with their kids, enjoyed everything, but people need that camaraderie. You need that office experience. And I think the remotely of building a team and having a team environment is so powerful for an organization. So I think that's something that I think a lot of people will just.
It's some of our current clients, they're 100%, we've seen like the Facebooks and the Googles of the world saying, well, we're not going back anytime soon. We're going to stay remote. That for well-established organizations that probably had a lot of their workforce working remote already, or at least in some capacity, they already kind of had some standard operating procedures and best practices, and just a cultural expectation of that. Whereas, we were running one of our programs for one of our they're a global medical device company, and we were working with their leaders in Scotland the past few weeks. And, that I was asking, I was like, how many of you have onboarded new employees in the past 6 months, for example? And most of them had. So they never met the people in person. They met them like this. The interview process was all virtual. The onboarding process, or what existed of an onboarding process, was all virtual. There are huge challenges from a leadership and management standpoint when it comes to leading remote teams or assembling remote teams in a virtual environment. So, I think the majority of businesses out there are going to, get people back in the office for the most part. Maybe some components of their organization will stay remote because the benefit of a talent acquisition strategy is that now, if they are going to retain a lot of remote work, their talent pool does theoretically open up to a much larger arena, because
massive. Now you're going global.
Scenario, I could hire someone from Toronto that normally I would be like, you need to be in San Diego. Yeah. So if it doesn't matter, then I can get great guys like you instead.
Let's talk about. I want to hear your mindset with an organization. We're debating this, and I have that mindset and I want to hear your mindset, because this is obviously in your lane. I was having this conversation with somebody the other day, and I actually transitioned about 2 years ago, because I got my staff. I'm looking at my office right now. This is a little studio built in office. I got a loft setting. I sit with my staff. Everybody sits together. We got the music blaring. I got kind of like that Google office setting. We have it's a loft setting, so we overlook the warehouse. People work in the warehouse. Everybody's just throwing things back. It's just a really relaxed environment, because I like having that relaxed environment. But I also run it as a team. 2 years ago, I used to run everything as a family. I would treat everybody like family, have barbecues, all that stuff. And I actually had this conversation with somebody about 2 years ago, and he brought it to my light of sports teams and having everything run. And that's something I transitioned to. It's I'll transition to hockey team, for example. We're from Canada. We got 4 lines. We got your top tier line, which is your stars, your highest paid.
Yeah.
Second, third, and then you have your fourth line. The fourth line are not going to be as talented. They're not going to do as much, but their job is, whether it's killing penalties, is needed. So I look at all our team, and everybody on that team is replaceable now. But we all have one end goal, is to win the cup. And we always have our charts on our boards of this is our month goal, this is our 6 month goal or 1 year goal. And everybody's aiming for the same thing. We run it as a team. Where's your mindset with an organization? Is it a team? Is it a family? Where's your mindset with that?
I love that question, because that was actually, although well-intentioned, when people think of the family environment of an organization, people think, oh, that's going to resonate with people. They want to be part of a family. Who doesn't love that concept? I find you can run into some significant challenges, which we did in my second business. That was my business partner's mindset, was we're a family. Now, I'll spare a lot of the nuances of how authentically that mindset for him even really was, just from a core values and general approach standpoint. But let's say it was well-intentioned. Whereas I think, especially with a military background, I think about a team. Now, you can obviously there's some overlap there, obviously, as far as empathy and caring for other people and supporting one another and looking out for the person to your left and right more than yourself, but not so much along the lines of shared sense of purpose, common goals, a very results-oriented organization. I found that the family approach can be just a little bit too loose. People can take advantage of it. The leaders can take advantage of it inadvertently sometimes too. So I'm with you. I think more just from my background, I think more about teaming than I do creating a soft family environment, because at the same time, extreme accountability and performance is what drives an organization. Everything else aside, we care about each other, we can support one another, we mentor, we coach. But at the end of the day, it's a business, and a business needs to grow, and it needs to hit its goals. Otherwise, why does it exist? And those things. Now, granted, you can create a great team that's very driven behind a shared sense of purpose, that has a great foundation around core values, supporting behaviors, accountability mechanisms for those behaviors, so that the behavioral expectations, and as leaders, we get the behaviors we tolerate and nothing less. So you can create an environment where your talent acquisition strategies match with that foundational behavioral environment. Your onboarding does, your training and development does, the decisions you make both internally and externally, even with the clients and customers you partner with, should in some semblance have something to do with your core values and the principles that the organization was founded upon in a best case scenario. But it still has to be a team. The family environment I found is a bit too soft, and it doesn't quite generate the outcome that the business really needs to thrive.
There's one where you use a little phrase you use quite a few times in that conversation, and I want to hear your mindset. What are strong core values for a company? Again,
in a best case scenario, and this is something we work a lot with our clients on, even large organizations think, well, they got the core values thing, they got that thing dialed in, which not necessarily. Oftentimes values, let's say there's 5 core values for an organization, like integrity and teamwork and those very common cliche phrases. Well, great, those are all good core values, but what do they really mean for the organization? Are they authentic? How were they developed? Were they developed in a vacuum? Were they developed by one person? Was there any buy-in? Are they authentic to the organization and the types of decisions that organization is going to make? So conversely, a solid set of core values really needs to guide everything. The people in the organization need to, in some way, shape, or form, emotionally connect to those values and have maybe not all of them, people have different perspectives, but have similar personal values associated. They need to be a part of that. And it should guide external decisions too. I've seen and made the mistake of partnering with clients who had, big coffers of money they wanted to throw at us, but vastly different values, vastly different purposes behind what they were trying to accomplish. Nothing sinister, but just different values. And those relationships, in my experience, never work. You can make a little money doing it all the time, but most of the time when there's a difference in values, even externally with strategic partners, investors, clients, and customers, those relationships might look good on paper, but they actually typically end up costing you more money, both hard and soft costs. So it should really guide everything. But what we teach our clients is don't just have core values and they're on the website and they're on the wall, in the hallway or in the boardroom, but there has to be specific documented behaviors associated with the value of teamwork. Well, what does that mean here in this organization? What specific behaviors are we going to measure ourselves and others on that associates with our definition of teamwork? And then specifically the third tier is, what are the accountability mechanisms? So I know exactly how to hold myself and others accountable to these behaviors that associate with this value. Then you have what we call like a team charter, or more of a culture manifesto. It's very specific in what we expect. Like, for example, the Navy SEAL ethos, which essentially is our sort of mission, vision, values, and culture manifesto all on one nice fancy one-page sheet. Well, we didn't develop that until 2005. The SEAL teams were created in 1962, similar to a lot of entrepreneurial organizations, because you're running and gunning your sell, profit, shareholder value. Well, we don't pump the brakes and be like, have we defined who we are as an organization? Like, how do we don't have any of these foundational pieces because we've been so driven by growth and creating profitability, or driven by a board of directors or shareholders, that we never took the time to do these softer things that aren't soft. They actually have a direct and measurable correlation to profitability and sustainability and employee retention, customer retention. And so it was actually after, 4 years after 9/11, we've been moving at the speed of war, and the leadership team was like, we probably should collaborate and document like who we are as an organization, who we're going to bring into this unique community and culture, and how we make decisions, the values we expect of the operators in this organization. And that's why it was created, because we had never created it before, and realized that if we're going to be at war continuously, we need to do a better job of having that foundation.
I love that. And I love how you said that, because a lot of entrepreneurs, when they first start their companies and they take off and they're running, their core values and their mission statements are just a couple of words put on a piece of paper to put on their website. And when you go into a business, and I do this all the time, and you go into a business and you see the culture and you see the environment, you see how it's run, it has nothing to do with what they put on paper. I love that because it's something I don't work on teaching, but it's something that obviously, as you're defining and explaining it, it makes so much sense, right? And it's something, and I love how you keep breaking it down to different levels where a lot of people just think it's one level. They just put it up there, it's keywords, and yeah, this is what we stand for. Like, okay, now break it down. Does that mean this? Does that mean this? And they can't answer you. So I love that aspect of it. Embrace the suck. Where did that all come from? I know where it came from, but when did it all start? When did you take pen to paper? When did you say, I'm ready to write another book? How did that all start?
So yeah, the new book came out, it's like 5 or 6 weeks ago now, Embrace the Suck, the Navy SEAL Way to an Extraordinary Life. It, in large part, came about by a lot of what we do at Taking Point Leadership to enhance the performance of an organization. Well, you can't accomplish that without enhancing sort of the rituals, beliefs, behaviors, and actions and accountability mechanisms of the people in the organization, especially from a leadership and management standpoint. So I was like, well, maybe there's an interesting, personal transformation project here. It technically falls into the self-help, self-esteem, success genre. I had never read a self-help book before, so I was like, seems interesting. Maybe I should get out there and see what's popular and see what resonates with audiences. So, I ordered a bunch of books and we're reading through them. Some things I connected with, some things I totally didn't. I really love Mark Manson's work, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. And his second book, Everything is F. I love the subtitle, A Book About Hope. It's just very kind of gritty, counterintuitive, very creative writing. But at the same time, the majority of what I found out there was not very actionable when it comes to tools and frameworks and giving the reader something to actually use. That's just how I think that's the type of content I resonate with. It's kind of something I've learned in writing with Forbes column too, because in 1,200 words or less, you need to be very, very concise and actionable. And so I took, some concepts of what I liked out there and obviously kind of did away with the rest. And, thought it might be a fun, interesting project. It also kind of ties into what we do to a degree, because some of the mental models in the book are part of what we teach in our leadership development courses. Just these are more designed for the individual from a personal and professional standpoint. And obviously put a little bit of a special operations spin on it. But the stories in the book aren't just my stories. They're from either other operators who've been through much more arduous situations than me, or historical figures or elite athletes. And so I wanted to have a really diverse cross-section of experiential storytelling. So it's not neither was my first book. It's not a war memoir. It's not a SEAL book that, it's a military book. It's, and thank God we've been blessed. It's gotten phenomenal reviews and in a very short amount of time and just a lot of feedback. Now, interestingly, going into the project, I didn't realize 2020 was going to suck so bad. So coming out in December 22nd, right after the election, in the midst of a global pandemic, yeah, the timing is somewhat cosmic. And of course, that's not to discount the loss of life or loss of business and the horrible things people have been through and the social, civil, and political unrest and financial uncertainty. But at the same time, it has been the feedback I've gotten. It has been a great tool for people who are in the midst of battling cancer or divorce or the loss of their small business or, a challenged relationship or parenting struggles and things like that. Or they've given it to their kids to read. I was like, well, there's some salty language in the forward because it was written by my teammate, David Goggins, who likes the word mother effer, like every other word. But to get past that piece, then you're fine. My daughter, who's 6, said I should write a kid's version. I was like, well, I'm going to have to rewrite the whole thing or drop the forward altogether. But no, it was writing a book it's this weird paradox because you want it to be successful. You want it to be a thought leadership piece. You want it to help drive the business. And, you want to sell a ton of copies, but the more copies you sell, the more you set yourself up for exposure, the more you set yourself up for criticism, which, I guess that's just the world of entrepreneurship in general, or thought leadership in general. But
100%. And you can't have that mindset. You're putting out your best foot and whatever follows the lead, it is what it is. I mean,
if you don't have any haters, you're not trying hard enough.
100%. How's your relationship with David? I mean, you brought him up. I wasn't going to bring him up. I'll bring him up for a couple of minutes. You met him in the Navy SEALs?
Yeah, so he had been at BUD/S for about 10 months, BUD/S being that first part of the SEAL program. He'd been injured a couple times, so he'd done Hell Week or portions of Hell Week twice already, which I can't imagine. I'm like, I'm going to do this once. I want to do this more than once. And so when I checked in, he had been rolled back from an injury and we classed up together. So we run 6 classes a year. So every couple months, a class will begin. So during that period of, couple months, 6 weeks in between classes, guys are for your class are kind of filtering in from all over different areas of the military, different areas of the Navy, the civilian world, what have you. And so we were in class 235. We were in the same boat crew together. Boat crew is a 7-person team, at least in the first phase, the first couple months, you do everything with your boat crew. So, got to know him really well. Definitely a very, very, very unique individual when it comes to drive and mindset. And one of the things that I started studying and researching when it comes to resilience and a growth mindset and mental fortitude is, where does it come from? There's that philosophy that, well, it's the greatest people with the most mental fortitude have had it hard their whole life and decided to navigate those hardships. That's not true. Like David and I, for example, have wildly different backgrounds, totally different personalities. It couldn't be more different. But worked well together. We're friends. He's not exactly a people person. I would say that if he was sitting right here, he would tell you the same thing. I found that a lot of people, the funniest comedians are like the most depressed people in the world, and sometimes the most motivational people out there don't like people. But for some reason, we're drawn to them based on their mindset or their content or elements of how they think that we want to adopt. And so we, and then we went to the same team together. Now we were in different platoons, different task units, so didn't really see each other that much. Even in a small team, if you're in a different platoon, you're on a different training cycle, you're in different parts of the world or different parts of the country training or on deployment. So you're not really spending that much time together. So, and then I transitioned out. We've just kept in touch over the years loosely. Typical team guys we're not really great communicators. It'll be like 3 years will go by and you're like, what's up? I'm like, what's up?
I was going to ask that. Is your team, do you still keep on a communication with all of them?
Not everybody, but yeah, definitely people I was closest to, and guys who've either are still in or who've transitioned out, and we collaborate on business or travel with our families together. So usually a smaller contingency, just because we're adults and we only have time for so many close friends and acquaintances. But yeah. And again, what's interesting though, in a positive way about a community like that is that we can, maybe this is more of a guy thing, not to bring gender into it, but we can go for 3 years without a single communication. And it'll be like, what's up? Oh, by the way, I'm in San Diego, want to grab lunch in an hour. You're like, first of all, a heads up would have been great. How are you doing? And then literally like within an hour, it's like you didn't skip a beat. So it's a really interesting sort of social dynamic where, we don't have to communicate a lot, but that doesn't change anything.
It doesn't change that person.
So anyways, to close the loop on that, when I said, I'm going to write a book about resilience, and David and I collaborated with him on his first book just to, he had reached out just to refresh memories on different stories from BUD/S and Hell Week and stuff. And so I was like, well, it's a book about resilience and mental fortitude and expanding your comfort zone. So maybe who better than to have write the forward than David?
Yeah. I mean, he's built a great, and I don't even think he's even tried. That's what makes it so incredible. He's built this great following, and it's zero effort on his part.
Well, I brought that. It's funny you say that because I brought that up. I was texting with him after a trip to New York. I had narrowed it down to. I was with Simon & Schuster from publishing company for the first book, and then I transitioned to Hachette book group for the second one. And I made that decision after a trip where my literary agent set up 4 meetings and met with all these different ones. And one of the young ladies with one of the other publishers, David's name came up because he was writing the forward, and she's like, that was because he was going down the path to a formal publishing company and then decided, I'm going to do it on my own, self-publish. And people are like, oh, that's a big mistake. And obviously a publishing company saying, David, that's a big mistake is more self-serving for them. But I think, a lot of people were like, why would you do that? It's you can be very successful that way, but oftentimes you don't have the resources that the publishing company can help provide you with. Now, granted, he was already in the midst of building a phenomenal, and owning a digital marketing company that had a whole social media department. I've never seen anything like that as far as organic growth around a following. And so she called it a self-publishing miracle. And so I was texting David. I was like, hey, you wouldn't believe what this girl said. She was like, she called your book a self-publishing miracle. That just lit us forward. He's like, how about it's just a great, well-executed strategy? I was like, okay. I was like, she didn't mean it like that. But his point was, in the colorful tone that he likes to communicate in, was that there was a strategy behind it. And he does have a small team, and it's his now wife or fiance, I forget where that dynamic has gone, but they've been together for a long time, and she really does help drive a lot of the strategy behind social media, the marketing, and things like that. So there was a bit of a strategy there. I don't think they expected it to explode the way that it did, but once they gained that momentum, it's just been a speeding freight train upwards for them. So
I think a huge aspect of it is he's been simple as word real. And I think that's one thing he uses on a regular basis. He was himself, and he didn't stream off it to make anybody else happy. He can continue that path. And through just organically, it's just like he's put himself in the right situations, Joe Rogan's, and the right situations to just explode himself. And it's just, you see his followings and the people that just, like, you name them and everybody seems to know him. Even people that don't follow him, everybody seems to know that name.
Even Trump's kids follow him on Instagram.
Good for him, man. Good for him. So there's a couple of things I want to talk to you before we get going. Toronto Raptors. How did you hook up with the Toronto Raptors, and what did you do with them? I want to hear that.
So the former head coach, I think was the offensive coordinator for Dallas Mavericks. Now he's the head coach of Dallas Mavericks for a period of time. And I'm from Dallas, and we had a similar network. And so one of my buddies from SMU who'd kind of worked in and around the sports arena there in Dallas put me in touch with him, Dwayne Casey. Dwayne Casey then took the job as the head coach, as you know, of the Toronto Raptors. And so they had been, it was just one of those opportunities that came up. They had one of their last preseason dinner events. And so they had, we were in touch, and they asked me to come out and speak to the group. So I did that a couple of times, but it's a great experience. To my joke earlier, I was like, you forget how young professional athletes are. You just think, well, they're on TV, and I just associate with them. So I make these just assumptions that we're sort of similar in age and experience, but we're not. I think the veteran on the team at the time was 26, like the oldest guy, the most experienced guy. Everyone else being like 18, 19, 20, 21. I've never felt shorter in my entire life. I'll say that.
Yeah, pro athletes, and just the money thrown around and their exposure is incredible, right? And a lot of them aren't properly running themselves as a business. And I always talk about this. If pro athletes ran themselves as a business, they would be so set. And that's the biggest thing. I actually had a conversation a few days ago with a gentleman that helps a lot of pro athletes. I want to say pro. He works more with Division I, with more college athletes that have built this identity around the sport. And when they leave the sport, that transition and they build identity. And this is something you probably talk with the military as well. You build that identity around it in that transition. And I think that's very hard with a lot of athletes, even guys that are at the peak that have made millions and millions. That identity stuck to them, and it's very hard. Where's your mind thought with that?
Same thing. It is a good, interesting correlation between military transition, but just much more sort of explosive when you think about the personal brand of maybe not all, but maybe some of the more notable professional athletes out there. And we see a lot of failure, for lack of a better phrase, when it comes to how they translate that in the civilian sector, just like in the military when there's a transitional struggle there. I think that the world of now, there might be nonprofits or for-profits or consultants who help professional athletes transition. I'm not aware of that. I don't really play in that space much, but I think they would benefit from that. I say that because now, having unfortunately been at war for 20 years, not that we don't need it in a peacetime either, but there's a lot of great nonprofits like Elite Meat and Honor Foundation and a lot of very niche ones too that work specifically with special operators and fighter pilots, or specifically with this type of branch or organization within the military community. And they're niche for a specific reason, so that they can be very targeted in how they help the transitioning person tell their story and create a narrative around their personal brand, so they can obviously find a career path that they want, or potentially entrepreneurial opportunities that they desire. But most of us need help and mentorship when it comes to the how of creating a personal brand. That can feel uncomfortable for a lot of people. Delving into thought leadership can be a little uncomfortable for a lot of people. So regardless of which path you're going to take, whether you go to grad school or Goldman Sachs or start an apparel company or whatever it is, like we talked about, you got to have a personal brand. You've got to have the ability to design and execute and distribute great content. Even if you're looking for a more traditional career path in corporate America, you have to be recognizable. So I think in the world of sports, I think they could benefit from, again, maybe there's organizations like this, but helping these young folks transition out and finding a way to translate those skill sets and their behaviors in their resume into something that's going to obviously have a long-term personal, professional, and even financial benefit. Because I forget what the stat is, but these young guys make a lot of money, but spend a lot of money traditionally too. They don't build a lot of sustainable wealth over that time period.
A quick question too. Have you, through your journey, these are just, as you're saying things, I'm just thinking of things. Through your journey, did you have any mentors?
Yeah, yourself? Yes. So,
is there one in particular that really made a massive change?
Yeah,
in your
one
vision?
that was interesting that kind of lasted through a couple of different transitions was one when I told my parents, and they understood that I was serious about leaving the world of finance and enlisting in the Navy for this particular program. So my dad, who had been a swimmer at SMU as well, put me in contact with one of his former swim teammates who had gone to SMU, transitioned out, and became a SEAL during Vietnam. And this guy was living, ironically, out here in San Diego, in La Jolla specifically. And my dad said, well, you need to talk to Tom. I think initially my dad's strategy was to have Tom talk me out of it. Well, that backfired. And Tom had transitioned out and was running a wealth management business within Merrill Lynch, very successful. And guess who became one of my very first investors in my first business. So again, you never know where these relationships will go. So obviously, if I had to pick one, that would be it, because there was some obviously mentorship when it comes to transitioning into the SEAL community and throughout that journey, and then mentorship, transitioning back into the world of business too. So.
I always ask one question. Our conversation, I usually never have any questions. I try not to learn nothing about my guests, just the bare minimal, because I like having open conversation. This is who I am, right? But as one question I always ask everybody at the end, in a few words, if something were to happen to you today, how would you want to be remembered or described by your loved ones?
I love that question, because it's actually how I close out the book. Is the last chapter is really about, kind of inspired by Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Number 2 being, thinking with the end in mind, behaving with the end in mind, making decisions with the end in mind, sort of your own personal exit strategy, and then working backwards to, make better choices, invest time wisely, build good relationships, be a good, spouse or parent or mentor or responsible business person, or someone who gives to causes greater than themselves. It's, so I talk about your eulogy virtues. It's probably not going to be someone standing out there being like, he drove a great car, really made a lot of money, and hey, how many Instagram followers he had? Well, yeah, it's crazy. Usually, it's not going to be that, or at least you don't want that. It's probably not the type of scenario you want at that final day when you're passing on to something greater. But I think it really has to do with thinking about what kind of mark you want to leave on the world, especially as it relates to your kids and your family, your business. We're big believers in giving back. My wife and we're an ambassador family for March of Dimes, and I'm on the executive board of the SEAL Family Foundation, and so we've always been big proponents and believe a lot in giving both time and money to causes greater than ourselves. Obviously, you want to have causes that you're passionate about, that you're emotionally connected to. But also, that's been one of my drivers. I remember when I first became an entrepreneur, I was like, I want to be successful enough and generate enough income so that I can give time and money to some of these types of causes. So I think along those lines, I'd be very blessed if that's the type of thinking people would associate me with.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's when you get to a certain aspect in your life and you have obviously different situations that are going to trigger you to be emotionally attached to a charity or to a cause. Like my son, as I told you, we've spent countless hours, 4 months of his life as sick kids, but we're constantly there. And that's a big connection to my heart. We do stuff all the time because, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, money means nothing to us, right? At the end of the day, money's not going to follow us underground. Yeah. No, and I appreciate that. I appreciate what you're doing. This has been an amazing conversation. I appreciate you. I appreciate you doing this. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to do this.
Yeah, I'm glad Mike connected us. He was like, "You're going to love this guy." He was
is there anything last minute you want to leave with our audience?
No, just kind of along the lines of what we're talking about is, and how I conclude the book is thinking with the end in mind. Think about something. We've all been through some pretty significantly challenging times. Whether it's business-wise, personally, or mental health, or financial strain, or just general exacerbated situations that already exist around marriage or parenting or business. Think about one or two things that you really want to change in a positive way, and develop a concise, measurable, time-bound plan, whether that's in your personal life or a fitness goal or engaging in better wellness activities or within your business, and get it done. Don't do it at the expense of other people, but get it done. So think with the end in mind and work backwards to develop a plan of action and execute.
I love it, brother. I'm going to put on all our show notes, how to get a hold of you, how to follow you on social media, how to purchase your books, how to get a hold of your company. If you're you do medium and large size companies? Yeah. So I'm going to put all the information in there and get a hold of you. And we do get quite a few downloads. So you'll hopefully get some reaction with that. And once again, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming on the Jeff Knows Inc. podcast.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you, man. And let's do it again sometime.
It's a wrap for today. I want to thank our guest, Brent, for being an incredible guest. Great conversation. I truly enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. If you guys enjoyed it as much as I did, please spread the word. Tell your friends, tell your family. Leave feedback. We love spending the time reading the feedback. 5 stars would be absolutely appreciated. Until next week, guys, keep moving forward.